Hello students, today we will be discussing Java servlets. In web development, there are two types of web pages. One is static web page which displays the same information again and again, and one is dynamic website where every time data changes. And for that, servlet helps a lot. No doubt there are many techniques, but one technique is servlet. Okay. Now for the servlet, just a minute. Servlet won't execute directly. For that servlet, we have to make the HTML first page first. Now how to make the servlet, that I will show you. First of all, we have to make HTML page, and then on this HTML page we have to create the form as shown over here. We have to create the form, and through form we can call the servlet. Now here I have designed the form with two input boxes through which I am reading two numbers, and I am displaying one button submit. So and the heading for that submit button is add. So when user clicks on this add, what I want to do is I want to take these two numbers into the servlet. I want to add these two numbers and result I want to display. Okay. So here through form I want to call the servlet. To call the servlet, we mention that servlet into the action. Okay. And method, we have two methods, get method and post method. Difference between get method and post method is the data which we are passing here. This is number 1 and number 2. If it is a get, it shows the value of number 1 and number 2 also. In case of username and password, we have to hide username and password. In that case, we go with a post. In that case, it transfers the data to servlet, but it won't show in a URL. So here this indicates we are creating our first servlet. Welcome to first servlet. In that we have designed a form which takes two numbers and one button. When user clicks on button, it goes to action S1. So it indicates go to execute this. Generally this is general, if you consider JavaScript and all, this is nothing but the function. But now here instead of function we are mentioning that we want to call a servlet. Now there is no direct contact between our HTML page and servlet. To make a contact in between, we have to create, or if you are using Eclipse, it will automatically creates your file web.xml. In web.xml, there are different parts. The main part which we need is servlet and servlet mapping. Here we are saying that we want to execute S1. This S1 we have to map here into servlet and servlet mapping. Now to map this, first of all we have to add here in a servlet mapping, we have to add here S1, that whenever URL pattern S1 called, go to execute the servlet with name first. In servlet mapping we have two parts, servlet name and URL pattern. In URL pattern, whatever we have mentioned here in action whatever we have mentioned, that we have to mention into the URL pattern. And in servlet name you can give any servlet name. This servlet name we are configuring into the upper part, that is a servlet. So now if you check the servlet, in servlet we mention the name which must match with the name which we have mentioned into the servlet mapping, and then actually here we mention the class which we want to execute, which we are creating for the servlet. So this is com.sangram is nothing but a package name. In Java I think already you have learned what is a package. And then first servlet is the name of our class. So to map servlet with your HTML page, web.xml plays a major role. And in web.xml, to map a servlet with our HTML page, we have to add two tabs, that is servlet and servlet mapping. In servlet mapping, we mention the URL and we mention the servlet name. That servlet name we are mapping into the upper part of the servlet, where we mention the servlet name and the actual class which we want to execute. So actual class name is present into servlet tab of web.xml into the servlet class sub tab. This is a sub tab. Now how your first class servlet looks like. Okay, so we have to start with the class. It must be a public, so it should be called from anywhere, and it extends http servlet because we want to create a servlet. Now in this class we have to create either do get or do post method. It depends upon what we have mentioned here in the method, what we have mentioned here. Now in this method we have mentioned post, so in servlet we have to configure do post. Okay, in do post it automatically takes two parameters, that is request and response. So whenever you create the servlet, your platform, it automatically gives you two parameters, request and response. Request parameter we use when we want to fetch the data from the form, and response object we use when we want to display the information on a website. This request, first of all we have displaying the form. In that form user is inputting the data, and that data we are fetching through request, and after that we want to display the result, and that result we will display with the help of response. Now how to fetch the data? So data we fetch with the help of get parameter, with the help of request object. So here we have mentioned request dot get parameter. This num1 and num2 which is mentioned here, num1 and num2, this must match with the name which we have mentioned within a form. So here we have mentioned num1 and num2, so this must match over here. Okay, now this num1 and num2, whatever data user types into the text box, that data by default is considered as a string. That data we have to convert into the integer with the help of wrapper class integer.parseInt is a static method which we can call with the help of class directly. So this data from the num1 I am taking into the n1, and data from num2 I am taking into the n2, and then we are creating third variable answer, which is nothing but n1 plus n2. Now this data we want to display on a website, okay, or on a Chrome or whatever web browser you are using. To display data onto the web browser, we take help of a response object. So here I am mentioning response, I am using response object. So response dot get writer, it allows you to create one object of type of class print writer, and with respect to this object wr we can write any information on a screen. So that I am using wr.print addition is, and then this answer I am displaying. Okay, now also this practically I will show you afterwards. Also it is possible to call the server from a server. To call the server from a servlet from a servlet. To call one servlet from another servlet, there are two different methods. uh, One is send redirect and one is forward. Okay, so here to call a servlet from a servlet, we create the object of request dispatcher. To call one servlet from another servlet, we use request dispatcher. To this request dispatcher we are creating one object rd, which is nothing but which we are creating from request.get request dispatcher. So whenever we are using rd, automatically it goes to the new page called as a show. Now if you want to transfer the data, there are different methods to transfer data between two servlets. The first method is we can set the attribute, and with the help of attribute we can send the data. So this is the attribute name answer, and then here we are sending the value. So this is the parameter you can say, and this is the parameter value. With the help of set attribute we are setting it, and then to go to the next servlet we use forward method. So rd.forward request response, it comes automatically here, this objects request and response. Okay, this two again we have to forward it. So when this statement is executed, rd.forward, it calls actually show. Now as I said, there is no relation between the web page and servlet and all. So whenever this show is called, it should go to the second servlet. Okay. Again that we have to mention into the web.xml file. So here we have mentioned the first servlet. In first part, with the help of dark blue, we are mentioning the first servlet, and second servlet I am mentioning over here. So this is a show. So this is the show. It calls the servlet name second. When servlet name second is found, it will call actually second servlet. And how our second servlet class will look like? It will look like this. So this is our first servlet program where we are fetching value of n1 and n2 from the user. We are adding this value into the answer, and then we are creating an object of request dispatcher. To transfer the value of this answer, we are using set attribute method of the request object. Then we are passing the parameter name and its value, and then it calls our actually servlet. Now in second servlet, to fetch the data, we use request.getAttribute. Now set attribute is used to set the value, and get attribute used to retrieve the value, and then we are typecasting into the integer, and that we want to display on a second servlet. Now here if you check this, here we are using wr object print addition is, so it will display simple addition is. But if you want to display like a website, then we can display the website with the help of that print writer object. So in print writer object we can use HTML tabs. Check here, h1 servlet, second servlet, end of the h1 tag, and then result is answer. In h2 we are displaying the result. So this is how we can call servlet and we can transfer the data. The first method is using attribute. With the help of URL we are transferring this value. But here what we are transferring the data, that is visible. If you want to hide that, the second part, that is we can here we are using forward method. We have one more method called as a send.redirect. Everything is same. This is the first servlet, and in second servlet we are using send redirect. So there are two different methods. Okay, one is forward method and second is send redirect. The difference between forward and send redirect is forward directly transfers from first servlet to second servlet, and in second dot redirect, that HTML page calls to the first servlet, and then first servlet again sends data back to the web.xml, and it asks to go to the, or it will pass to the client, and it asks client to redirect to the show. Okay, so the difference between forward and send redirect, from HTML page it goes to the first server, and from first server, just a minute, हाँ sir, हाँ हाँ काही नाही, काय चला रेग्युलर अजून काही नाही आले, कोण कोण नाही अजून. So from the in previous method, that is in forward method, from HTML it goes to the first servlet, and from first servlet it directly goes to the second servlet. This case won't happen here. From the HTML page it goes to the first servlet, again it comes back to the server, and from server it goes to the show servlet. Rest part is same. There is no change in second servlet. Second servlet remains as it is. Okay. Now here it always shows what data we are transferring. If you don't want to show the data, then second method of transferring the data, first is using attribute. Okay, second is we can go with help of cookies. We can add the cookies, and with help of cookies we can fetch the data. Cookies is a ready-made class with the help of which we can add the cookies. Okay, so we are creating cookies, and in a response we are adding cookies, and then we are using send redirect, so it will go to execute show. In second servlet, to fetch the data, we use request.getCookies. GetCookies is used to fetch the data. Okay, it fetches all the cookies, and then using for each loop, we have to check each and every cookies. Now we are interested in ANS because ANS cookies is added through the first servlet. So we are getting the name, and with name we are comparing that name with answer, and if name matches, we are taking into the answer. If this name doesn't match, then initial value is mentioned as a 0, and rest part is same. But the problem with cookies is, if cookies are disabled, if cookies are disabled on a client side, then our program will not work. Okay, the first is set attribute. Using attribute we can transfer a data. Set attribute to add the data, get attribute to receive the data. Second is using cookies, because in attribute it shows what data we are transferring. To hide the data, the second method which we can use is cookies. But in cookies, if client side cookies are disabled, then we cannot implement our program. So the next method is session. We can create a session, and through session we can transfer the data. So here we are creating, in first servlet we are creating one session object. In session object we are setting the attribute, and then we are sending the value, and then we are using get attribute to receive the value. Rest part is same, there is no change. So we can use URL rewriting. This is URL rewriting. We are transfer data with the help of URL, or we can transfer data with the help of cookies, or we can transfer data with the help of sessions. Okay, so this is about the servlet in nutshell. Thank you very much.